Hello and welcome to Pretty Owl Poetry. It's our online reading series, and we're glad that you're here with us tonight. We have flash fiction writer Duncan Talbird. His fiction and essays have recently appeared or are forthcoming in Ploughshares, Juked, the Literary Review, Amoskeag, and elsewhere. An English professor at Queensborough Community College, he has held writing residencies at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts and the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. He is on the editorial board of Green Hills Literary Lantern and lives with his wife in Brooklyn. So welcome, John, and thank you for spending some time with us tonight.
Thanks a lot, you guys. I thought I'd start with just reading a couple of flash fictions, and then we can go from there. This was the piece that was published that's published in the most recent issue of Pretty Owl Poetry. It's called 11/18/82. That year I had such grand plans, and I remember it down to the time of day when those plans changed, 8:08 p.m., because I just glanced at my watch right before it happened. I was hanging out in the 7-Eleven playing pinball with Robbie. It was the brand new, sparkling clean 7-Eleven on the other side of 34th Street, as opposed to the dumpy Magic Market closer to home, which smelled like fried onions and only had Ms. Pac-Man. Robbie had gotten a multi-ball play and won an extra game right before the guy came in. The guy had on an orange Gators cap and acid-washed jeans. And then right after that, a bunch of dirty children burst in, running up and down the aisles, making a racket. A couple of them chased each other around the island where they keep the coffee and soda machine, and the cashier, a middle-aged guy with jerry curls, yelled, "Kids, I told you kids not to come in here and make all that racket and shit." The guy in the Gators cap put a six-pack on the counter and then pulled out a gun and waved it around. "This is a stick-up," he yelled, as if he was in a movie. I think it came out later that the cashier was a store owner and a former cop or mercenary or something. He grabbed a gun from under the counter and fired off a shot before I could blink. I continue to think of that moment, especially as its anniversary approaches, even though it's been 30 years and I'm far from Florida now, spending much of the interim moving around the country until, solidly in middle age, I decided to stay put in NYC, take the sightseeing exam, and get my license. The fear is never far, particularly on cold days like today, when I take bundled up tourists out on the boat to circle Manhattan and narrate what they're seeing as we pass a Freedom Tower or a Yankee Stadium or go under the Brooklyn Bridge. It's nearly always in my head, even while I'm lecturing about Robert Moses's impact on New York or the history of the Alexander Hamilton Custom House. Any one of these listeners could have a gun hidden somewhere. In fact, even the people I work with every day, Sonny, who serves beer at concessions, or Rodriguez, who steers the boat, or little blonde-haired Tammy, who sells T-shirts, they could all be armed. The cashier shot the guy in the shoulder with a sawed-off shotgun, which spun him around but didn't kill him, so that he squeezed off 2 more bullets. A big hole appeared in the back of Robbie's head at some point in all of this. I was already on the floor, but the pinball machine was flashing and dinging, and Robbie was standing there like he was still playing and trying to win another game. And this other piece I'm going to read is called Barmally Fountain. It's based on a very famous photograph of a fountain in Stalingrad. And the photograph is happening in the siege of Stalingrad in World War II. It's got a picture of stone, it's a sculpture in the fountain of stone children holding hands in a daisy chain running in a circle with a crocodile in the middle of it. And behind them are the buildings all on fire. And so it was my inspiration for this piece here. Barmally Fountain. Terrace will one day see Barmally Fountain, the statue of laughing children in play, circling a crocodile, waterless. Fires raging around it in the charred ruins of his beloved Stalingrad. But now he is like one of those stone children screaming, "You are it!" in the chill morning, stealing minutes on the frosty streets before he must head to school for lessons in the history of the people, the story of the tyranny of Western capitalism, the emancipation of the dark peoples of the world from the hypocritical slavery of the capitalist whites, the exploitation of the native people by colonialists, the relentless greedy absorption of natural resources by the moneyed elites. His teacher, Mr. Susnan, sketches one vivid scene of violence after another so that this classroom of boys stays wrapped despite the overhead heated room and the click of hard shoes in the hallway heading to lunch. These romantically horrific images stay with Terrace throughout the afternoon until art class, where they manifest themselves on the paintings he does in yellow, black, and blue. As the afternoon races toward dusk, he hurls his body through the world like a projectile, engaging in wars of rocks and bottles with neighbor friends, and seldom is he the one heading home for dinner with a bloody lip or skull. Although the world is dangerous, he sees it as full of possibilities. Years later, during the months-long siege that will be called the Battle of Leningrad by future historians, Terrace will narrowly miss getting crushed by a falling wall when a bomb hits the corner of a building just so, shattering its coin so that one wall falls north and the other west. This close call, not the first, but somehow perhaps due to the prospect of being crushed like a bug, the most chilling, is what makes Terrace finally desert, using family connections to slip onto a shipping vessel headed down the Volga to the Caspian Sea and then into Iran so that one day, a year later, he will see the Cayenne volcano in a little village in Ecuador. In the employ of a distant cousin, he will engage in charting the cartographies of unspoiled and unexplored places, a concept generally baffling after a life in communist Russia, with its factories and buildings, its concrete, and then the shattering of so much of that concrete by bombs and bullets. Born in 1925, he's just barely a man, and yet feels that he's seen so much. On the second night in this valley, the natives at the base of the volcano will bind the cartographers and lead them into a clearing next to a raging fire. At midnight, under a full moon, Terrace will undergo an elaborate operation involving delicate stone blades and fire, and amidst the chanting voices of an ancient language, he will have an epiphany of sorts. In his mind, he will go to a place where he holds the hands of his school chums as they laugh and run in a circle, a snapping crocodile at the center of their daisy chain of limbs. His cousin Elizabeth will just miss losing her black padded leather shoe-clad foot and the snapping jaws, and the children will laugh. Terrace rushes greedily to that moment in time and space, although the things being done to his physical form try to pull him back to the South American amphitheater. Like a soundtrack, the voice of his elementary school teacher, Mr. Susnan, instructs him in the evils of America. That's it.
All right, well, thank you. That was great. One of my questions is about the first piece, which was in Pretty Owl, and I guess because you used a date as a title, I'm sort of thinking maybe that was based on something that happened, or I was just sort of interested in what inspired that particular story.
Okay. Let's see. Well, let's see. I think that's two questions. First, the date is it's essentially about 9/11, I guess. 9/11 is this elaborate thing that is marked with this number. You know, the numbers 9/11 will never just be 9/11. And I guess I was thinking about if you have violent tragedies in your life that aren't so public and so shared, they also are important too, I guess. But they're just yours then. They're not shared by everyone else. And I think that is what I sort of think that story is about and why I named it that. At first it was just 11/18, but then I thought, well, no, it was just supposed to be 11/18, just like 9/11 is just 9/11. But then I thought, well, it might make the character more likely to know what his age is and fix him in time, I guess. if I put the year. So I went back and forth about whether it should have 82 in it or not, but that's what I did. And then as far as the inspiration, I think I just thought I like that. I like playing with time a lot in my stories, and so I think I just had that phrase, that year I had such grand plans. I just like that phrase. And I just sort of started adding the next sentence and then the next sentence. And although they didn't all end up being in that order, that first sentence was the first sentence in the story.
Interesting. It's interesting to think about what that would read like without the year in it, because that definitely time-stamped it for me as I was reading it. So it'd probably be a totally different read if there wasn't a year on the end, perhaps, maybe.
Yeah. And now, as I'm talking about it, maybe it shouldn't have a year on it. I don't know. I went back and forth about it, like I said, and maybe it would be more like, it didn't occur to you that it might be referencing 9/11. That's one thing about living in New York, is that you're always aware of it. And I wasn't here when 9/11 happened, but it was still, it affected people everywhere in this country. Mm-hmm. But here it's so ever present, Mm-hmm. You can't go.
Yeah,
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, hearing your explanation made a lot more sense, but I don't think that initially dawned on me, but it's even cooler now to me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm
okay if someone doesn't get that connection too. Hopefully it's ambiguous. Right. You can get different.
Yeah. Well, one of the other questions I had written down, because I'm always sort of curious about this, is how do you decide when you're writing a little piece of flash fiction, how do you decide what you're going to include and what you're going to maybe purposefully leave out? And I realize that's probably story specific, so maybe you can use an example of the two you read. How do you decide, since it's just such a short amount of space?
Right. Well, flash fictions are a little weird for me because I sort of define them as they have to be under 1,000 words, and so I generally set out to write them, and I'll write a bunch at a time. And so since I know that they have to be under 1,000 words, I start out knowing that it's going to stop, and I try to stop, I guess, as opposed to working on a novel or a longer story, both of which I've done, or essays, or poems too, that with flash fictions, the immediate thing I'm thinking about is, when can I stop this? And so I have really small fiction that, like I say, I'm going to try to write a one-page story and things like that, but most flash fictions, I just know that I need to finish it before it gets to 1,000 words, and I can see at the bottom of the document how many words I'm getting. And so if it goes over 1,000, it's not a flash fiction. But usually, because I can write a bunch in a week, I say, well, I'm going to try to write a bunch of flash fictions this week. And so it's really very formalist, I guess, in a lot of ways. It's not about cutting stuff out. Usually, if it's too long, then it feels like, well, it's another kind of story, and I let it just be the story it's going to be. But usually, I'm trying to write it brief, so I'm immediately trying to end it almost as soon as I'm starting it.
No, that's cool, because that's kind of like setting manageable goals. That's what's kind of nice about flash fiction is, you can work on so many a week, and they're like, a moment in time, so you can just really focus on it. Mm. Kelly, I think you had a question that was sort of what we're talking about. So
yeah, I feel like you might have already answered it, though. I was kind of curious. When I spoke with Sherry Flick last night, she was saying that when she knew you, you were mostly working on a novel at the time. Right. And so I was kind of curious how you got into writing flash, like if it was something that had happened organically, like you found yourself writing shorter pieces and then that sort of propelled you to write more flash, or if it was more an exercise, like, oh, I wanted to try to write flash, and now you're writing more flash because of that.
I think it was for really crass reasons. I met Sherry, and she was had done really well with her flash fiction. She published in some really good journals, and she sent me some, and I traded. I gave her, I don't know if I gave her my novel manuscript, but I gave her some stories to read that were longer, and we liked each other's work. But I was, I was in graduate school and trying to publish and not having a lot of luck. I published a few stories, and I thought, I worked at Prairie Schooner when I was in graduate school, and I saw up front how little real estate they had to spare for writers without a name. There had to be a certain number of name writers, and only so many stories could go into your typical journal. We only came out 4 times a year. We got thousands of submissions over like every few weeks, and I sort of realized that I could improve my chances, because sometimes we would publish something just because it fit in the space. And so I just did it. I'm like, well, I need to learn to write these really short stories so I can get published. And I did, and then I sort of found, well, I actually can write these, and I enjoy writing these. I'd always wanted to be a poet when I was like 20 and 21, and then I just realized I read more fiction. I was better at writing fiction. And so it's sort of like I'm using these muscles that had sort of atrophied. And I started writing poems for the first time in like well over a decade last year. So I'm working in other directions. I started writing creative nonfiction, which I hadn't ever done. Well, I sort of dabbled with it, but I started writing it more seriously. So yeah, I think it was really good for me to write it. It sort of broke me out of this comfort zone. Maybe I had been sort of stagnating for a while.
That's cool.
Yeah. If I can add my 2 cents here on your decision to put 82 at the end there.
Okay.
I mean, I think that adds a lot to it. I don't know if you could have removed it. Basically, I mean, when you kind of introduce the villain in the story, I guess, who's kind of sort of the main character in a way, the acid wash genes and stuff like that. There's 2 major characteristics I see, which is the gator's cap, which localizes him. That's Florida right then, right away.
Right.
The acid wash genes kind of sets it into the 1980s.
Right.
I mean, 82 though. When I hear that, I'm thinking like cocaine busts and stuff like that in Miami. I think they got like $100 million worth of cocaine or some astronomical number like that, busted out of cartels around then and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you were living in Florida around that time and stuff like that?
I was. I grew up in Florida, and so I guess part of the story is autobiographical. There was a really crappy. A Magic Market is sort of the Florida local version of 7-Eleven. There was a crappy, ugly Magic Market near my house, and on the other side of the street there was a nicer 7-Eleven. There was no shooting or anything like that, but it is sort of it was in Gainesville, Florida, where I grew up, North Central Florida. It's very different than South Florida, which is what you're talking about. But there was, just like any medium-sized towns, there was lots of crime, some of it drug-related.
Right, right. So I mean, I guess what I'm wondering here is when you put yourself when you dig back into there and you're back into Florida in 1982, and I mean it shocked me when I was reading it. My first reaction when I read it was, this isn't real. There's not arcades in 7-Eleven, those don't exist. And I spent most of my childhood in a 7-Eleven. Don't get me wrong, that was a major store in my town, but there's no arcade there. That sounds awesome. But I'm reading that, and it does a great job embedding itself in the time and the place. And then you return to that towards the end of the poem, the flash fiction, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. And then there's that one part of the story where you're in New York, you're in the present day, you're on a ship, you're giving a tour to people and stuff like that. And it's different. You're obviously in a different place, a different time, a different setting, imagining things completely differently. how do you distance yourself from the story? Do you think that it's time that distance yourself from the story, or do you think it's place that distance yourself from the story, or do you think the time and place are totally inseparable?
Huh. I guess I'm not completely sure I understand your question. What do you mean by how do I distance myself from the story?
Well, I mean, the story creeps up on you. You're looking around at all the people. They have guns. They might have guns. They don't necessarily have guns, and in a lot of ways, the past of the story is definitely seeping into the present, and you're seeing these things. But certainly, you're not there. There's a difference between your present place in New York, doing the narrator's place in New York, doing the tour, and that childhood playing arcades in a brand new 7-Eleven. What do you think is the major separation between the Florida 1982 scene and the 2000s New York scene? Do you think that it's the difference between Florida and New York, or do you think it's the difference between 1982 and 2014? Sorry if I worded that odd the first time through.
That's so interesting. I wouldn't even think about it as differences. I think about it as connections. This is a pretty recent short story, and I wrote it. I wrote it around the time of the Connecticut shootings, and I think, to me, I've been thinking a lot about those shootings lately, because you would think that, like, there could be some a certain atrocity could change people's point of view, and so the Newtown shootings, you'd think, well, that would just shock everyone, that people would say, well, maybe we shouldn't all be carrying guns with us everywhere, and nothing really changed, and so I could think, if someone had experienced something really traumatic like that, and they're having to live in a world, especially in a place like New York, where there's like over 8 million people living here crammed together in this small space, and that some of them are armed. I mean, it's just, in our culture, we just know that some of the people that are around us are secretly armed. And to have this experience where you saw this, that would be in your mind all the time, I think. So I guess I see these two moments as being incredibly linked. And this narrator, this guy, is carrying it around in his head all the time. And so he sees it in all the people. He sees all these people. They could be the guy with the jerry curls or the guy with the gator cap. It could be the same. They're essentially the same. They're all the same if they have the gun. The 6-shooter was called the equalizer because everyone is the same. You immediately have a gun and you're equal to the other person with the gun.
Interesting, man. Okay. Awesome.
I can chime in again. I have more questions, of course. These are not really related to the stories per se or writing. In your bio, it says that you're involved with the Green Hills Literary Lantern, so I wanted to know more about that project.
Okay. It's a literary journal. It's also an online literary journal, and it used to be a paper journal. And like a lot of paper journals, it's funded through Truman State College in Missouri, and like a lot of journals, they just weren't able to afford to put it out in paper anymore, and they went to an online journal format. And I'm just on the editorial board of it. My friend Erin Flanagan, who also went to graduate school with me, she started reading for them, and she said she suggested me as a reader, and so I said, yeah, I'd be happy to. So they send me stories every now and then, and I read for them, and then sometimes they publish the stories I think they should. And sometimes the second reader doesn't agree with me, but I love working in the literary journal world, so I did it for the first time in graduate school, and I love to, sometimes I would really argue my point. I'd feel really passionate about something that I saw, and feel really good when something was published, and so that I admired, and so I like keeping my foot in that world. So.
Yeah, it can be fun. Maybe we need to get an editorial board. No, I don't know. Um, are you working? Are you working on anything else right now? Because I saw an interview with you online where it said that you were working on a novel about like lighthouses and the CIA, something else. Are you still working on that?
I am, yeah. I keep thinking that I'm almost finished with it. I've been working on it for years and years, and I'm almost finished. Then I just will have to starts growing more and more. So I'm not working on it. I do a lot of flash fictions and essays during the school year because of my job, and I try to get work on the novel during the summer because I don't work then. And I get most of my writing, my long writing done in the summer. So I'm still working on it. I'm hoping to be done in a year or so with it. There's a lot of research involved with it. I've had to research the CIA, and part of it's set in Haiti, and so there's a lot of different stuff that I had to read about and talk to people about. So,
Oh, right. That's cool. Nice. Does anybody else have any other questions?
I mean, I guess I'll ask my token question.
okay.
In a world of online submissions where you're constantly engaged in text, you're sending emails, you're sending text messages, flash fiction, being more or less the length of a very in-depth email.
Right.
How do you separate your literary pursuits from just the normal jargon and conversations you have with people through text every day? What separates your artwork from just your conversation?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think I used to put a lot more passion into my emails when it was a new form, I write long emails to people, and now it's gone the way of writing letters to people. I used to write letters to people, I don't do either one. Sometimes I get into lengthy emails with my students. Usually it's about their writing. So I'd say that my flash fictions are they're a different kind of performance than an email is. They're more playful maybe than the emails are. Though emails can be playful too, I guess. I don't know. That's a good question. How do you separate the two?
I'm not being interviewed here. I don't know. That's why I ask the questions to people. No fun asking someone a question you already know the answer to. So I guess I'm trying to figure out that for myself as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It seems like the text, and I hesitate to admit this, but I just bought a smartphone just in the last several months. My wife and I were using flip phones until just a few months ago, and so we're pretty new to the whole text world, and I'm getting to like it, but it's not. It's still very, very fragmented the way I communicate with people. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like text and emails are so utilitarian. Every now and then, when I'm meeting someone new that's a writer, I can get into it. We can end up exchanging emails for a while, and I'm reminded of when I used to write letters, or when email was a new form and I was really into it. But often it's just sort of I've got to write an email and be done with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like it is definitely evolved.
I don't know, I was going to say, so maybe it's kind of an exploration of the unknown. I forget who it is who has the quote, but no, I'm not gonna remember who it is. Who was the quote? But it's the only reason not to the only reason to write about anything other than the unknown is to make money. So once something becomes routine, I guess that's kind of it. You're either doing it to make money or you're doing it to figure out something new. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's it with emails.
All right. Well, thank you, John, for joining us tonight. It was a great discussion. It was good to hear your stuff live, and, well, not in person, but kind of in person. So thank you again, and we did have a viewer, so thank you for viewing, and don't know who you are, but we're glad you're watching, and be sure to check out our next online reading. All right.